All right. So we're excited to be here with you all today to talk about art and the infusion of art into EIB work. So let's get started. Despite the fact that we're meeting in a virtual space, we're going to take some time to acknowledge the Indigenous lands that we're zooming in from. And we know that land acknowledgements can be controversial. And this land acknowledgement that I'm about to read was written in partnership with an Indigenous elder who's worked with Healing Equity United to recognize the importance of honoring the lands that we're occupying. And so we start off this way to express gratitude and appreciation to those territories we are residing on, and as a way of honoring the Indigenous people who have been living and working on this land from time immemorial. It's important that we understand the longstanding history that has brought us here and seek to understand our place within that history, whether we came here by choice or were forcefully brought to this country. And so myself and my co-facilitator, Katie, are zooming in from the lands of the Muwakma, Ohlone, and unceded Duwamish territory lands. It's critical that we take a moment to recognize the historic discrimination and violence inflicted upon Indigenous peoples in the Americas, including their forced removal from ancestral lands and the deliberate and systemic destruction of their communities and culture, which still happens today. Over 100 million Indigenous peoples were slaughtered in the Western Hemisphere over the past 500 years. And today, there are only 6.8 million Indigenous folks left in the US. Please join us in a moment of reflection to acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past and present, and to consider how we are and can each in our own way try to move forward to dismantle the continued oppression of Indigenous communities. We encourage you all to look up the land that you're on, and Katie just dropped a link in the chat that you can use to find the lands that you're zooming in from. Educate yourselves about those communities that are native to your land, share your learnings with others, and take action to support those Indigenous communities when you can. We also now invite you, if you'd like, to honor the lands that you are zooming in from by entering their names into the chat. And again, feel free to use the link that Katie dropped if you need support looking at those lands. We'd also like to take some time to acknowledge that we are in the midst of National Wellness Month. And radical healing is a core value at Healing Equity United. And this month, we're celebrating its necessity in overall wellness. We know that radical healing is critical to the betterment of individuals, organizations, and collective wellness at large. Healing requires many things, including racial healing, which we believe is often overlooked and excluded from the commercialization of self-care and wellness. Healing from racial trauma is a foundational piece to DEIB work and is absolutely essential for the betterment of organizations, groups of people, communities. Racial trauma occurs on macro and micro levels, from institutions and systems rooted in oppressive values to individual behaviors such as microaggressions and other acts of harm. Healing requires centering the needs of those most oppressed and marginalized through dedicated space, time, and resources. We hope that you all can take some time today to center your personal healing and to advocate for healing to be a central value within the spaces that you occupy. And I will be dropping just a couple resources on the importance of healing and a toolkit for some healing practices into the chat. And thank you those who are acknowledging the lands that you're zooming in from. Please keep those coming. All right, so our group agreements for our time in the Zoom room together. At this point, we are inviting you to be as present as possible for the next 50-ish minutes that we are together. So silence your phone, close your inbox, remove any kinds of distractions. We invite you to turn your cameras on if you'd like to do so. No worries if you cannot. But this is an official moment where we're asking you to do what you need to do to be present in our time together. We also encourage you all to use the chat to engage with everyone. Again, shout out everyone. Thank you for acknowledging the lands you're zooming in from. Please use the chat throughout our time together. Katie and I would love to have a conversation, have this feel like more of a conversation in the space today. Know that the recording will be sent out to everyone afterwards, as well as a PDF of the slides. So if you know someone, a colleague or a friend who registered and wasn't able to make it, they'll still be able to access the content from the recording. We love to see reactions button emojis. So if you feel so inclined to do so, please share those to show us what you're thinking or feeling. And last but not least, be your own boo during this time. If you need to take a step away from the camera or, stand up, stretch, take care of a kid, a dog, do what you got to do to take care of yourself. And so with that, myself and Katie, we'd love to take some time just to introduce ourselves as facilitators so that you can get to know who you're in the space with for today. So hi, everyone. My name is Cassie Whitebread. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the senior consultant at Healing Equity United. I've been with the team for about 3.5 years now. And I'm going to share some of the identity markers that I come into the space with that, informs how I approach the work. So I identify as a second generation Chinese American. I also identify as mixed race or biracial, as I have a white father. I also identify as queer. I am an East Coast native. I was born in New Jersey, but when I think about home, I think of the city of Philadelphia. I'm a first-gen college student, first-gen grad student as well, and started my career out as a middle school science teacher. And so I wear that educator hat in all of the spaces that I occupy. I currently, though, live in Seattle, Washington. I've been out here for, almost 8 years now, which is hard to believe. I live with my doggo and my partner, who are pictured here. My partner identifies as a Black man, and he's working in the space of housing and homelessness in Seattle. So we have a lot to talk about, and there's a lot of overlap in our work. I also, and this connects to our time together today, I also identify as a ceramic artist, and a lot of my pieces center on my experience as a queer Asian American woman. And my work has been shown in group art exhibitions within Seattle. Katie, I'll pass it to you.
I did not know that, Cassie, that we
Yeah,
haven't talked about that.
it's been, this year was the first time that I submitted some of my work. So it's a new identity that I'm trying to embrace.
That is so cool. But hi, everyone. I'm Katie Kwan. I go by she, her pronouns. I am third generation Chinese American. And so currently am on Ramaytush Ohlone land, also known as San Francisco. As a third generation, my grandparents came here in about the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And they kind of represent both dichotomies of the Chinese American experience. On one side, I have two grandparents who went to college. They both escaped the war against the Japanese and were able to really kind of attain the American dream. And on the other end, I have a grandparent who did not finish middle school. The other one was a paper daughter at Angel Island, and so she came under a false name and pretty much they both lived their lives in fear of deportation for pretty much their whole lives. They did eventually become citizens, but even then the paranoia never quite faded away. I myself have been teaching Asian American Studies for the past 6 or so years formally. I was a college instructor. I worked at City College and at San Francisco State. And then last year decided that as much as I loved being in the classroom, I wanted to jump ship and enter the world of both entrepreneurship and education. And so instead, for the past year, I've been working as a freelance artist, a freelancer just altogether, and then have been developing a business called Real Soul that really focuses on bringing the intersections of ethnic studies into K-8 spaces. And so, yeah, I've been very, very lucky to be able to pursue this and also not get hassled by my parents along the way. So that is me.
Thank you, Katie. So before we get to know who's in the room and maybe connections to the topic, those of you who might be new to our organizations, we wanted to just take a moment to share a little bit about our work. So those of you who might be new to Healing Equity United, our mission is to foster equity, diversity, and inclusivity by compelling individuals to examine their own power and privilege. We move them from awareness to action, ultimately realigning resources, dismantling systems of oppression, and healing communities. And our work typically falls into three buckets, though we do some work outside of this as well, but consulting organizations on creating more inclusive cultures, mainly working with nonprofits, though we do work with some government agencies and for-profit companies. We offer comprehensive workshops and trainings. We don't do the one-off kind of model. It's a partnership that usually lasts from 6 months to 2 years or more. And then we also do diversity, equity, inclusion audits so that organizations can get an understanding of where their current culture is at. And Katie, what about Real Soul?
Yeah, so Real Soul, we've started about 2 years ago, but have kind of hunkered down officially in the past year. Real Soul is a curriculum arts organization. We're located here in the epicenter of radical change. And currently we offer a lot of, or we offer curriculum development primarily in the, or yeah, primarily in the realm of lesson guides and professional development. We also have done a lot of different kinds of workshops. So whether they're educational workshops or art making workshops, our goal is to make sure that these stories of marginalized communities is easily accessible for the general public. And then the last part is that we also do a lot of community-based collaborations. So making sure that the work that we do is always within the community and it's always inspired and empowered by movements. And so, yeah, our goal is to just constantly honor that and then also move that forward.
Thanks, Katie. So now we'd love to just get a feel for who is in the room with us. And so we're going to do a couple check-in questions. And the way that you can engage with this is by raising a physical hand or using your raise hand function on Zoom. And so raise your hand if you are currently engaging in diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, DEIJ, DEIA, whatever acronym. Raise your hand if you are engaging in that kind of work, either through work or in a community group that you are a part of. Raise your hand if you're engaging in DEIB work in the moment. Yeah, cool. All right. Thank you all. Cool to see. Raise your hand if you engage in a creative hobby, whether it be drawing, dance, music, etc. Raise your hand if you engage in a creative hobby. Yay. Love it. All right. Hands down. Raise your hand if you've combined your creative hobby with your DEIB work. Raise your hand if you've been able to combine your creative hobby with your DEIB work. Very cool. Linda, I'd love to hear in the chat if you're willing to share how that manifested. I love it. And then the last one that I want to ask y'all, instead of raising hands, I'd love to either hear from folks, you can come off mute or you can put your thoughts in the chat. Are there any instances of artwork as a way to bring attention to social justice movements that you all can think of? Either recent, past, or historical instances. Is there anything that comes up for you? Feel free to take yourself off mute or put it in the chat. Yeah, is it Wendy? Oh, we can't hear you, Wendy. In the meantime, I see a couple things in the chat. Linda sharing out how she was able to combine DEIB work with their hobby, their creative hobby, art therapy as a tool and vehicle to help marginalized students feel more included in the space. I love that. Let's see some other instances. I always think of Common and Rage Against the Machine's lyrics. Yeah. I think of migrant worker movement, Teatro Campesino. Mm. Oh, Katie helped me organize a generational storytelling event in San Francisco. Yes. Using art of dance to DEI work and to DEI work. I love that. Awesome. Thank you all so much for sharing out. I think this is a great segue. Katie and I would be remiss if we didn't have a moment just to uplift and highlight some of the instances of infusing art into DEI work or into social justice movements. And so just to pull out a few, I'm sure some of these on the screen will resonate with folks and are not new. I'm going to go from top left to right and go all the way down. And so Can't Stop Crying for America, Black Lives Matter by Jung Jang. That came out, I believe, was it 2020 when that came? Was it in 2020?
Yeah, probably something along those lines. But John Zhang has been doing a lot of work that intersect with Asian American struggles and sort of ongoing struggles.
Yeah. Thanks, Katie. Yeah. Amanda Gorman and her poetry. I'm sure we've all seen clips and videos on her work. Catherine Denham, who's someone that I didn't know about, but her work in kind of the dance sector, her choreography addressed issues of race, class, and culture and blended modern dance with African and Caribbean movements. And her work also became known as the Denham Technique as a cornerstone in American dance. Um, Emery Douglas and Black Panther Party artist that we can see one example of his work here. Bread and Puppet Theater. I don't know, Katie, I know this was a new one to you, if you want to share anything about them.
Yeah, they do a lot of things about anti-war movements. They continue to be really active. A lot of the work that they do is larger than life. It's not just like a puppet on your hand. It's like a massive thing that you can carry around in the yard. And yeah, it's really amazing to see. I would highly recommend you to just check it out.
Awesome. Theater of the Oppressed, which is an interactive and physical and playful process used to investigate alternative responses to situations in which people encounter oppression. And so this is a pretty common one. Maybe some folks might have done this in workplaces or in trainings, conferences. Bottom left, the music from No Boy. An innovative songwriter and multimedia project that's based on Asian American history. The middle bottom picture, Presita Eyes muralists who are based in the San Francisco area, and they work to enrich and beautify urban environments and educate the public about the process of and the history of community mural artwork. And then last but not least, This Is America by Childish Gambino always comes to mind when I think about the ways in which an artist will utilize their practice to bring attention to a social movement, right? This song and music video reflects on the core of the Black Lives Matter movement, the ongoing issues of systemic racism and prejudice, racial violence, law enforcement, as well as, issues of kind of the wider mass shooting issue that we have in America. And so these are just a few kind of maybe wider known instances of ways in which artists are able to kind of infuse social justice and racial equity, anti-oppression into their work. And we're so excited to talk with Katie a little bit more about the ways in which she's been able to do that as well. So Katie, I'll pass it over to you if you want to give any context before we show a video.
Yeah, sure. Yes, so thank you everyone for being here. It sounds like we already have a room of artists, so I won't go too much into depth about like, the significance of art because you're here for a reason. But I did want to at least share a little bit about my own lived experiences. And so I'm gonna have Cassie play the short film. This is a film that I created about 2 years ago. I have a couple different versions of it, but one of them, the the this is the friendlier and more accessible version, I'd say. There's one of me that just, when you're filming yourself, you have a whole bunch of different cuts that you just like decide not to show anybody. And so there's other versions of this. However, this is the one that is the most inspirational, I'd say, out of all the cuts, and really just kind of showcases the journey that I've been having for the past few years through the arts and through social justice movements. So.
Hold on 1 second. Let me make sure the volume is up.
Art was always advertised as an individual activity. But as I got involved in my community, art became something that embodied movements.
Happy birthday. It's her birthday. This girl.
I am a comic artist, a teacher, and a small business owner. For the last 7 years, I've been operating Real Soul as a comic series turned storytelling platform turned curriculum business.
Now the fairy Merryweather returns.
My gift is on your 16th birthday you walk.
Ever since I was young, I've always been a bit of a performer, a storyteller, and well, a bit offbeat. I started drawing and writing from an early age. Story after story, I loved getting lost in worlds beyond my own. Then, in high school, my teacher introduced me to the world of comics, and I was hooked. When I started This Asian American Life as a comic series, I didn't think much of it. I was just a kid publishing comics online for the first time as part of a New Year's resolution. Having grown up in a competitive environment where excellence was measured by praise, the volume of applause, and the number of acceptance letters, comics gave me something that was uniquely mine. When I talked about my work, family members tried to grasp on to any part they could. However, this meant that big names and big numbers were the only things that mattered. As such, it pained me that my accolades felt glossed over at the dinner table. I was told that my family were my biggest cheerleaders, but this was something I'd have to face without them.
If you care President wrong, come down and join us. You walk with the students when it's about athletics. When are you going to walk with us in ethnic studies? Whose education? Our education! Whose education? Our education!
In 2016, the SF state strike started. For months, students and faculty protested budget cuts at the College of Ethnic Studies. While others chanted and protested, my voice shined most through my comics.
Our Asian brothers and sisters, and particularly our Korean brothers and sisters, we would like you to know, history don't have to repeat itself.
As the pandemic began, this Asian American life began to pick up traction. People wanted to do something, wanted to say something, but they didn't know where to begin. So I offered my work as that resource. Getting involved not only gave me the validation I craved, but people loved and shared parts of them so selflessly. And when they saw me, no explanations were needed. They just knew and supported me for it. Through making and developing Real Soul, the process continues to challenge me to critique and reevaluate who I want to be and what makes me happy. With the help from good friends like Francis and Miss Dorothy, my partner Kevin, and so many more, Real Soul has a solid foundation to grow on. As members in our communities, we have the responsibility to ask questions, spark discussion, and dismantle the systems of oppression. And perhaps one day, someone can sit on our shoulders and reach beyond our imaginations.
You have something that's been in the making for a while. This approach of having a collage of images and messages that really speaks to and engages with the realities a lot of people in this society are facing.
Cool. Well, thank you for watching. And yeah, if you'd like, feel free to add in any of your thoughts or comments into the chat. Oh, thank you, Leanna. Well, I guess I hope you get a tissue. But thank you so much for sharing, and thank you for listening and being receptive towards listening to it as well. But as the real question of this is, how does art really kind of tackle DEIB issues, and how can we talk a little bit more about that? And so the way that I like to approach it, partly because I am not necessarily in the realm, I know that DEIB kind of looks different on different levels. And so in education, it will look different from nonprofit, that will look different from for-profit and sort of corporate. And, you know, there's so many different ways to interpret it. But the way that I kind of go about it is I always like to bring it back to the self. So I start with how I'm understanding myself, how I understand the world around me, and we'll kind of go into a few different layers of this. But this is this is a piece that I drew a while back. I did about a year of therapy. I had been debating upon it for months and months, and then finally decided that I think it was time to try it out. This was a quote actually that the therapist had said, and I thought it was so great because I was like, it's so true, which was shame, guilt, and moms. The 3 different recipes for why people potentially may be in therapy. And, you know, especially in August when this is National Wellness Month, being able to really kind of take a step back and understand how all these different elements really impact us is really, I mean, that's a huge part of that healing process. We are constantly bombarded by all these different kinds of messages. And especially, you know, for me, most of my background was really in nonprofit before going into education. And nonprofit, or at least the spaces that I was in, is all about cranking out as much as you can, as fast as you can, trying to keep up with all these, you know, various problems that are constantly bombarding them. And then there's also a race for money. And trying to, you know, pretty much get the money before anybody else gets the money is a real struggle, and it's a real thing that people are constantly dealing with. And so before the burnout, the hope is that at least you can start diving more into what that looks like, talking a little bit more about the relationship between yourself and money, talking about maybe what are some ways that you can collaborate with other people. And for myself, I like to try and get this all out onto paper. I like to get it out onto either paper or I use my iPad to draw. For a long time, I was using paper though. And then I would take a picture of it and I'd scan it and I'd, go through this whole really lengthy process to put it onto the computer. But, whatever ways in which you like to share and share your stories, like that is the way I would ultimately start off with. So being able to take the time to ask all these different questions, and also being able to share them with other people. One of the things that I guess like a lot of people within my generation like to do is speak their mind to everybody. And so being able to share this for myself on social media was part of that healing process. I tend to sometimes forget that I have family members who are also on my social media and who will interact with this as well. And so having these really difficult discussions is part of that journey. For myself, my dad saw this image. My mom doesn't have social media, but my dad saw this and was like, I think you should take this down. And he would be horrified to know that I'm telling you this story. For him, it's very much like, what will people think of our family? What will people think of how we're understanding, how people are seeing us, and what that does. And so there's even a little bit of censorship that might come into it if you decide to share it with the world. And so being able to find ways to also navigate that. I know that especially in nonprofit and education, well, actually in all of the working workforce, that censorship can feel very much like a thing, because you're allowed to say some things and you're allowed to you're not supposed to say other things. And so being able to find ways, I'd say in some ways to kind of code around it, can also be very helpful. But yeah, so starting off with understanding the parts that really kind of trigger you and being able, if you're able to, either having an outlet to express it or actually having someone to speak to about it, I think are all really great places to start. And if you have no one else to share it with, feel free to contact me on social media. And I would be more than happy to have that discussion with you. So I'm just going to put that out there. If you can go to the next slide. Okay, and so starting with the self, we have that, and then kind of going into a little bit broader, how we interact with people around us is the next step, I'd say. So you start with the self, you go to, or you can actually also go backwards too, but then talking with friends and family, trusted, you can talk to a trusted book club, or if you want, you can also talk to Reddit, anything like that. But being able to have those discussions and being able to point out those contradictions, but also having someone to validate a lot of your emotions and your thoughts is really, really helpful. And so, for example, I've had, I'll speak to the one on the right with the woman with the glasses. This was a comic that I had when I've had people and I include my own family in this, who have told me things like, you can't even hold chopsticks correctly. How do you call yourself Chinese? And if that is the bar of what it means to be Chinese, that is a very low bar. Also, like, didn't your mom teach you manners? All these things in which it's this imaginary way of understanding your own identity. This is how people are crafting their identities, and this is how they expect other people to craft those identities as well. And you can probably maybe tackle some, and you can't tackle all of them, especially not at the same time, and not especially as they all seem to contradict one another as well. And so, picking and choosing which identities you want to actually really push forward into the world, and then having friends and family there to agree with you, or to even challenge you further, of being like, why do you feel that way? Or, can you talk a little bit more about that? Or sometimes they'll even say, I don't agree with it. And knowing that, that they may not always agree with it, that's part of the challenge. And that's part of that discussion that you can have as well. This is a quote on the left side from a book called Minor Feelings, which I love. It is such a beautiful demonstration of Asian rage and frustration and imperfection that is, I don't think, always put out there. But she had this quote that said, Asians lack presence. Asians take up apologetic space. We don't have enough presence to be considered real minorities. We're not racial enough to be token. We're so post-racial, we're silicone. And so if you'd like, feel free to take a moment or two to write into the chat, maybe how that makes you feel. And also you can, if you wanted to, you can say whether you agree, disagree, or if you've had lived experiences that may or may not demonstrate this. Feel free to reflect upon that for a couple seconds there. And if you'd like, you can also just think about it too. You don't have to write it. Let your vote. Okay, so I'll keep going, and I'll read out loud if anybody puts in the chat. But when I was reading that, I remember I was probably in a space where I remember thinking to myself, this feels very true. This feels like the reality, at least that I live in. And this was, I think, right before a lot of the anti-Asian hate. And so people didn't feel like they wanted to speak out because, at least for them, like Black Lives Matter, and in some ways also climate change and all these other sort of movements that were happening at that time, it's not that it didn't feel related to them, or to people in some of these spaces, but it was more of like they didn't know how to interact with those spaces. And it can feel isolating at times. And so being able to have, you know, these kinds of narratives that can help push you to think more about it and then to later on have those discussions is part of that journey. And you may not always agree because, you know, even when I read back on this, it's kind of, it can be upsetting and it can be really frustrating and being like someone's putting out this narrative into the world, or there's a lot of people who are reading this book. But having that discussion is such a huge part of it. That's one of the reasons why in the early, I think 2010s, the narrative of Tiger Moms came up, is because somebody had put out a controversial piece and the world, well, at least my world, I mean, within Asian American studies, so my own world or my own bubble, we're all talking about it. In 2010s, Jeremy Lin had just come on the scene, and it became a conversation about representation in sports. It also came into a space of what does Jeremy Lin's representation, you know, being Chinese, when he has dreadlocks, you know, like what does that look like? You just end up questioning everything around you, and that's part of that journey. And hopefully you have a safe space to do that as well. I think that's probably the more important part. But if you can go on to the next slide. But more importantly, I guess once you go through some of these different steps and you feel comfortable with yourself and you also feel comfortable, you know, being able to express yourself, being able to open space for a combination of joy, healing, and also allyship, hopefully takes yourself out of your own identity and into other spaces where you can empathize. One of the big things I would say, especially for DEIB within the workforce, is being able to buy from local organizations and small businesses that you really support their mission and their values. Understanding where people get their funding from, that's a huge part of it, and something that I think, at least for a lot of Asian American organizations, that's something they're dealing with right now. Being able to support, you know, for example, artists that you really gravitate towards, being able to get services from people like Healing Equity United, and being able to support that, and knowing that your money is also going to, no one likes capitalism, but if you're able to use at least that buying power and being able to support others, that's a huge part of it. And then also, you know, once you get out of your own community, or once you start kind of expanding that bubble, being able to also share your voice on different issues, like if if you feel safe being able to talk about Israel and Palestine, being able to talk about what's happening in Sudan, talking about all these different issues that may not just be affecting your community, but also just saying that this is part of what human rights looks like, and this is the world that I'd like to see in the future, and being able to voice that, because we need more voices like that. We need people to speak up, and we need people to be able to utilize whatever they feel works, whether it's their voice or their art or anything like that, being able to use that in a positive way. But yeah, Cassie, I'm gonna send it back to you.
Yeah, I'd love to just take a pause. Thank you, Katie, for sharing your journey and kind of the approach that you've taken in terms of combining your practice of art and kind of enmeshing it with social justice. I'm curious what comes up for folks in terms of, what are some strategies that you can utilize to bring art and more just joy and creativity into your DEIB work, especially if you're not necessarily at an art-focused organization, right? I know a couple of Seattle-based organizations that are creating or striving to create more inclusive spaces within the art community, but there are lots of different things that you can do to incorporate art in your DEIB work, even if you're not centered on art specifically. And so I'd love to hear from y'all in the chat. What have you seen works in terms of your organizations or community groups that you're a part of in terms of combining art and DEIB work? And as y'all are thinking and sharing in the chat, I'll share a few that come up for me. I know some people feel very conflicted or very strongly on the opposite end about icebreakers. But I do think that they are a space where we can infuse that art and joy and creativity, whether it be the I Am From poem, which maybe some folks have heard of before. It's a very simple activity where you ask your team to describe themselves in 3 lines of a poem, all starting with I am from. And they can take it from smells to experiences and memories from their childhood to anything that they are engaging in the current moment. And it gives an opportunity for you to get to know your team on a deeper level, other than a check-in of how are you doing today, right? And so I highly recommend that one. Some other ways to get to know folks on a deeper level, which, as Katie kind of alluded to, right? A through line that's included in this work is really just being able to see the humanity in people and to empathize with others. And in order for us to be able to do that, we need to get to know one another beyond the hats that we wear at work, right? And so some deeper level check-in questions of rosebud thorn, right? Where it's like, what is something that positive that's happened in your life as of late? What's something you're looking forward to? And what was something that might have been a thorn in your side or a bummer? Another one, what color best represents your current mood and why? Or what are you feeling grateful for today, right? So utilizing that icebreaker or check-in question as a moment to dive deeper with your teammates to help build trust and vulnerability, and again, to get to know one another on a deeper level. A couple other instances of ways or activities that you could use to infuse art into your DEIB work. Using drawing, writing, or collage to help understand individual perspectives on a decision point. So one of the ways that my previous organization did this, we were deciding on, we had just gotten a grant, and there were a couple different directions that we could take the money and put it towards our work in our organization. And one of the ways that we got to hear individual perspectives was asking folks to draw. What would you want to see with this money? What would you want our organization to move towards, or what would you want it to look like, to sound like? And that was a way where we were able to, one, get feedback and perspectives, so that folks were feeling seen and heard within the organization. And two, it helped us to kind of narrow down what we would want to do with that funding, right? I see that Wendy put in the chat art activity, like sharing what represents them, like a dream board. Love that. And I love that that's one that you could use like physical, do like a collage with magazines and whatnot, or you could use Canva. Any other thoughts? And Katie, any other things you'd like to add to this?
Yeah. And outside of icebreakers, as much as I love a good icebreaker, that you can also be able to bring some of these strategies into affinity spaces. Whether it is if you're doing holiday stuff, you can do vendor markets. You can also do things through beautification, so like purchasing art. You can include murals within that. You can also have music, live music, where you're being able to support your local musicians. Also being able to, if you're doing events within those affinity spaces, you can do, as Jaden had said, a storytelling event. Storytelling is very much an art. You can also have films and film discussions. These are different parts, and it doesn't have to be a long film. It could be a short film too. That's totally fine. But these are just small ways of being able to take a break from, I guess, sometimes the talking, and being able to kind of add it into a more natural sense. And then sort of, this is more of a practical sense as well, is being able to include translation. So if people don't speak English, that translation on its own is very much an art form. And then also being able to honor all the different ways that people think. And so if you're able to afford a graphic note taker for either an event or a meeting, that at least it gives a different way for people to understand the things that people are talking about. And also it kind of gives you a nice like goodie bag to bring back at the end of the day. But those are a few others.
I love it. Thanks, Katie. And if y'all can think of any others, feel free to put those in the chat. We want to share about a collaboration that Healing Equity United and Real Soul were able to work on as a way for you all to potentially incorporate more art into your DEIB work. We, over the past year or so, have been working on a zine collaboration. And so, Katie, I'll pass it over to you to just share a little bit about like the origin story of that collaboration.
Yeah, so I was in a webinar very much like this, and it was the first time I had ever met any of the HEU staff, and I liked really what they were talking about, and I emailed them after. I said, hey, do you want to do a collaboration? And they were super nice. They didn't even ask any questions, even like, oh, are we going to get paid? It was like, sure, that sounds great. And that was pretty much the origin story of this project. But it's become something that's really cool. And so, Cassie, do you want to talk a little bit more about it?
Yeah. So yeah, we were able to create a series of 4 zines on 4 different anti-oppression related topics. So Katie and I spent a number of hours trying to take some very big like topics that could be college level courses and boil them down into digestible segments with some really amazing illustrations from Katie. And we originally were doing the project for middle school to high school age students. And so we have a set of kind of teacher guides for these zines. And we realized we also want to be able to have adults and DEI teams, employee resource groups and whatnot, be able to utilize these zines as a way to get conversations going around these topics. And so we took the zines and kind of redid the teacher guide and made it into a personal guide as an opportunity for folks to individually reflect and dive deeper into these topics. The 4 that we did were on the concept of woke intersectionality, unlearning implicit bias, and then what is whiteness. And so the personal guide, provides an opportunity for you as you're reading these comics, these zines, to, again, dive deeper individually. And then each section also has some discussion questions. So if you were reading these with a team, your DEI team or affinity spaces or whatnot, there are discussion questions so that you can dive deeper in the content with one another. And then also some recommended resources at the end if you were looking for further reads or podcasts, films, other forms of art, and other ways to dive deeper into the content. And so we're really excited about this partnership, and it's been such a joy to work with Katie on this. So the teacher guides and the zines you can find at Real Soul's website, and it's a work in progress, but the personal guide will be up and running on Healing Equity United's website, and everyone who registered for this event will get a newsletter blast once the zines and guides are up on the website, so that you'll be able to access them. Anything I might have missed, Katie?
It's
About the
free.
partnership? Yeah.
It's free. However, we also love donations. So if you'd like, you can donate to us through my fiscal sponsor at Real Soul, and you can just write it in a sort of a note there. But it's like we said, it's free, and everything's also black and white, so you don't even need a color printer to enjoy the beauty of just illustrations. It's also all on 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper, and you can print as many zines as you'd like, and you just have to be the ones to fold it, cut it, and then, piece it together. But it is made to be as easy as possible. We also have instructions of how to fold it, just in case. But yeah, and then everything else you have covered.
I love it. Thanks, Katie. So yeah, at this point, I know we've gone over a lot, and it's been a lot of me and Katie talking. And so we've got a little bit of time. If there are any questions, specifically if you have any questions for the artist, for Katie, who we are so lucky to have with us, please feel free to put those questions in the chat. I had a question come in earlier that maybe, Katie, if you feel comfortable, we could talk about. And then everyone on the call, please feel free to put those questions in the chat so we can keep track of them. But one question that came in: have you ever received any backlash for your work? And if so, how did you respond or handle it?
Yeah, some of the stuff I would say, luckily I'm in spaces where the things that I talk about are pretty well received. I'd say the backlash, or maybe observations, we'll say, from actually students is, I have a poster that says "Serve the People," and it does have an image on the bottom of a girl that says "Power to Black people," and then something "power to yellow people," not white, to yellow people. And some students were questioning it and saying, is it appropriate to say yellow people, or to use the term yellow? And we had to have a huge discussion. We had a discussion about what that means, and what it means in the current day, and if we should even, if we can retire that term as well, because the political landscape looks so different from before. But yeah, it really kind of allowed for us to have that discussion and be free with that. Yeah.
Thanks, Katie. I see Leanna asked, Katie, do you ever experience artist block, and how do you move past it?
I do anything else but draw. So I feel like I get my best ideas when I am walking, or I'm taking showers, or I'm gardening, anything else that's kind of like with my hands or with other parts of my body. And it just kind of allows my brain to rest a little bit. I've also gone through many different drafts of things as well. And so, what might work before may not work now. And being able to kind of reinvent it in different ways is also helpful. But in terms of really kind of what I do to get past an artist block, it's pretty much just giving myself time to rest, and to kind of to enjoy, you know, everything that you've already done, and appreciate that as well. But yeah, thanks for the question, Leanna.
I love that, Katie. It definitely aligns with our appeal for Wellness Month. One other question that came in, what inspires your creative process and how do you approach the development of a new piece from concept to completion?
Yeah, I get inspired when when I read and look, you know, go to museum exhibitions, or go to all these different things. And the more I read, the more I see common themes between maybe one group and the next. And I always just have this urge to bridge them. Or if it's with comics specifically and talking about my own lived experiences, sometimes it's talking about how I can, how I can almost exacerbate, I guess, the conversation and how I can kind of make it funny, but also how I can poke contradictions into it. So as much as I love, you know, being able to work with, for example, you know, the similar ethnic groups, being able to be like, well, also, you know, it's also my own people who are doing some of the harm as well. And so being able to kind of point some of those contradictions within it all. But in terms of the process, I am kind of a one and done person. I don't like to go back too much for it. So everything I do is pretty much on the same canvas. I might just have a draft, and then I will go in and outline and then color. But it takes a lot for me to kind of like have a much longer piece. If people enjoy having longer piece, then I would say kudos to you, because that's a lot of work to like stay dedicated to that piece. And more power to you. But yeah, I think the thing that I was told in grad school was a good thesis is a finished thesis, which is not the best way to go into things with, but for me, it's kind of like, if I can finish an art piece, then that is fantastic.
Yes, don't stay attached to that perfectionism.
Yeah.
Don't let perfect be the enemy of good. I love it. Thank you so much, Katie, for answering those questions. I see we're at time. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Thanks for taking the time out of your day. Again, the slides and the recording will be sent out, and we'll also let you know once the personal guide is up on the Healing Equity United website. But in the meantime, if you want to take a look at the zines and the teacher guide, it is up on the Real Soul website. And thank you all. Have a great rest of your days. Take care.